Rising mirage-like in the July haze from the battle-scarred Western Front, a simple playing field and grandstands stood as an oasis of sanity and symbolism. A nation, before the war deemed not deserving of the title Allied Power, boldly invited the world to its Dominion Day party, and they came. The Prince of Wales, the Duke of Connaught, American Commander-in-Chief General John Pershing, British Commander Douglas Haig, and Allied Supreme Commander Ferdinand Foch. They all came to commend, to honour a nation, a corps, and a man whose invitation they would not refuse. General Sir Arthur Currie. Canon Scott, Senior Chaplain of the Canadian 1st Division, remembers. There must have been nearly 40,000 spectators present. A British general told me that the playing of O Canada by the massed bands was something which made a lump come to one's throat. Canon Scott. Dominion Day 1918 was as much a tribute to recent Canadian military triumphs as it was the de facto passing of the baton and the burden of spearheading the final Allied offensives on the Western Front. It was not what they had done, but what they were expected to do, which made the Canadians and this July celebration so remarkable. German forces just 4 months earlier, in March 1918, had overwhelmed the British on the Canadians' left and poured south. And on the Canadians' right, they had overwhelmed the French and had poured west. General Sir Arthur Currie, commander of the Canadian Corps, instinctively knew why the Canadian position had been left untouched. We've beaten them every time we've fought them. Why would they attack us? As boastful as General Currie's declaration sounded, it was in fact true. A succession of Canadian military triumphs had led to this extraordinary day honouring the accomplishment of not an army, but a corps comprised of just 4 divisions. Arthur Currie, the man at the centre of this celebration, was as unlikely a candidate for war hero as ever set foot on a parade ground. Physically unfit and a failure in business before the war, citizen soldier Currie, after having commanded no more than 400 men during peacetime, had risen from relative military obscurity to command of the elite fighting machine on the Western Front, the Canadian Corps. His ascension through an unparalleled string of military successes was a feat most professional soldiers in the British Army would not equal. He often stated, everything he learned of war was from fighting the present one, and ironically, inexperience became the foundation of his success. Original thought and stubbornness both endeared and infuriated his superiors, but they came to believe, based on his strategic triumphs, that he had a gift that Napoleon had long ago recognized as vital in a good soldier: coup d'oeil, battlefield, intuition. He could read the ground to his own tactical advantage. 19th century military historian Karl von Clausewitz further defined a commander's coup d'oeil as having 2 distinct qualities which are indispensable. First, an intellect that even in the darkest hours retains some glimmering of inner light which leads to truth, and second, the courage to follow this faint light wherever it may lead. Germany's first push through Flanders, Belgium in 1914 brought Britain into the war and in turn, as a member of the Empire, Canada. Germany's plan was a dagger strike at the heart of France, Paris. The First Battle of the Marne in mid-September 1914 halted the German advance and the war of movement on the Western Front. For the next 4 years, protracted trench warfare ensued as German forces captured all the strongest defensive positions in France along a 400-mile front from the North Sea to Switzerland. Behind this formidable barrier, they awaited the Allies to advance and seek their own destruction. By 1918, millions of men had been thrown against this impenetrable concrete wall, and it had not budged but a few miles in either direction. As if foreshadowing the war's epic struggle and untold hardships ahead, Canadian forces began life on Britain's vast, mythical and rain-swept Salisbury Plain, and Lance Corporal Charles Henry Savage was among them. I suppose that there were intermediate weather conditions, but in retrospect, two extremes always present themselves to me. Either it was raining and streams of water were flowing everywhere, or it was bright and dry and the wind was blowing the sand into our eyes and clothes, but more particularly into our food. I gained 10 pounds in weight while at Salisbury, and I'm sure it must all have been in sand. Canadian forces embarking from Salisbury Plain for the front in the spring of 1915 believed nothing could be worse than what they had just endured. They could not have been more wrong. Today, the bucolic beauty of Flanders fields in western Belgium and the walled city of Ypres stand in stark contrast to its violent past. During the First World War, this ancient city stood squarely in the path of the German war machine. The apprenticeship of Arthur Currie began here at the notorious Ypres salient, where, as a brigade commander, he gained first-hand experience of the inherent chaos and uncertainty of war. 1915 marked the dawn of the deadliest and most psychologically devastating weapon unleashed on the Western Front. 90 years later, the air in Langemarck remains unmistakably oppressive. This was a place of unspeakable terror and instant death. Codenamed Disinfection, the first German gas attack on April the 22nd left 6,000 French and Algerian troops dead, drowned in the fluid of their own collapsed lungs. Fleeing forces left a 4-mile gaping hole in the lines, which the Canadian 1st Division on their right scrambled to refill. General Currie, commanding the 2nd Brigade, with communication lines cut, took the initiative to seek reinforcements. As soon as I arrived and mentioned to General Snow that apparently there was a gap between the left of my 8th Battalion and the 3rd Brigade troops, he shouted at me and asked how dare I allow such a gap to occur. He roundly abused me and told me to get out, shouting at me, "Give them hell! Give them hell!" The next day, hell descended on the Canadians. Remembered as the Battle of St. Julien, the Germans, unable to exploit their earlier breakthrough, squarely targeted the Canadian-held Apex near Gravenstafel Ridge. It was an all-out effort to obliterate the salient. At 4:10 a.m. on the 24th, the gas returned. The 1st Canadian Division, against seemingly hopeless odds, held the salient, but at terrible cost. More than 6,000 men, fully 1/3 of Canada's entire fighting force, were casualties. The German decision to gas the Canadians at St. Julien instilled in them a deep hatred of the enemy. General Currie, in comments after the war, stated, "We gassed them in return every chance we got." The Canadian stand at St. Julien had robbed gas of its psychological impact, and Currie's performance, despite General Snow's condemnation, was commended. He was promoted to Major General and commander of the 1st Canadian Division, and Currie wasted little time in formulating schemes to disrupt the enemy. Winter 1915 marked General Currie's initiation of dangerous but effective night raids designed to capture prisoners and demoralize the enemy. He told his men, "We own the ground right up to the lip of their trenches." On June the 2nd, 1916, at Mount Sorrel, the most massive bombardment yet of Canadian troops began. There was no warning, no gradual working up to a crescendo of fire. One moment it was a beautiful, quiet June morning, the next it was a hell of exploding shells. The shock of the sudden noise alone was almost overpowering. In unexpectedness and intensity, it was comparable to an explosion in a powder plant. Charlie Savage. Newly installed commander of the Canadian Corps and architect of the recent brilliant Allied withdrawal from Gallipoli, General Julien ordered Arthur Currie to lead an immediate counterattack. Currie protested for more time to properly plan, as no one knew where the Germans were. Byng refused and set the attack for 2 a.m. June the 3rd. As Currie feared, the attack failed. Byng now gave Currie the time he had originally requested to develop a plan of his own. Currie began here what would become his hallmark use of artillery in an innovative way. Rather than the predictable approach of sending the ground attack over the top immediately after the artillery barrage, the Canadians began and ceased the artillery 4 times. At the end of each barrage, the Germans would man their guns and prepare for the attack that did not come. By the time the Canadians actually attacked at 1:30 a.m., the German defenders had lost their edge and were thrown off their normal routines. 1 hour was all it took for the men to regain all the ground lost to the Germans in the attack on June the 2nd. General Currie had successfully executed his first deliberately planned attack on the Western Front. It would not be his last.